Caffeine is so bad. Why is everyone using it? If I told you your morning coffee could prevent diseases like Parkinson's, dementia, cardiovascular disease, and even gout and other special forms, would you change how you drink it? Hi, I'm Robert, an ex-finance professional that turned his obsession for self-optimization into a career. In school, I was diagnosed with concentration disorder and offered Ritalin or Adderall. But instead, I found ways to concentrate myself and how to succeed in life. In this video, I will offer you the most practical guide you will find on YouTube. First of all, we have a look into the scientific observations about caffeine. By the end of the video, you know which dose, which source, and under which conditions you benefit and under which you don't. Now about caffeine. Is it really all bad? I summarized a table with the scientific evidence that suggests otherwise. First of all, we have dementia. 2 to 3 cups of caffeine can decrease the risk by minus 18%. And that is both for either 2 to 3 cups of coffee or 1 to 2 cups of tea. Next up is cardiovascular disease. Minus 15% risk for 3 to 4 cups of coffee. It has to be pointed out that this relationship has a U-shaped curve, meaning that higher doses then again worsen the effect and lead to cardiovascular problems. So you really have to dial in the sweet spot. 3 cups of coffee, 2 cups of tea, and up to 200 milligrams of caffeine can decrease the risk for Parkinson's by minus 28%. For coffee especially, that distribution was also nonlinear. Gout, the disease that basically has you build little crystals in your joints, fingers and foot from uric acid, a very painful disease which has your joints swollen and red, and I'm really not planning on getting that one. Interestingly, most of all coffee was found to have a significant reduction of minus 40 to almost minus 60% in really high doses. People that drank over 4 cups of coffee were really benefiting here. The interesting part is that also decaffeinated coffee was having a good effect here. Depression was lowered by minus 8% per cup of coffee, and for tea, a 14% mood improvement was found. It was among consistent tea drinkers, no specific dosage, unfortunately, in this regard. But for coffee, 2 to 4 cups are the right amount. Type 2 diabetes was decreased by minus 6 to minus 7% per cup of coffee, depending on if it was decaffeinated. And the maximum was reached at a interestingly high amount of 5 cups of coffee per day. Now the thing that I'm really specializing in my research is the cognitive improvement from caffeine. Vigilance, reaction time, and also some measures of attentions have been improved by 40 to 200 milligrams of coffee in a whole variety of studies. All-cause mortality, summarizing most of the above diseases, was decreased by minus 70% for coffee and minus 10% for tea, with an average of 3 cups per day of coffee and 2 cups per day of tea. So caffeine can really improve your health. If you want to see less of this, spend less time at the hospital, you should potentially incorporate some sort of caffeine into your daily routine. That is, if you want almost 20% of dementia risk reduction, minus 15% cardiovascular disease risk reduction, minus 28% risk of Parkinson's, or lower overall all-cause mortality. So we see that caffeine really holds a lot of potential. At the same time, these are observational studies, usually big cohorts, looking at a time interval of 5 to even 40 years in the big dementia study. Really interesting. There's certainly correlation between beverages like coffee and tea and these diseases, and not so many other sources of caffeine have been tested here. So we would have to see clinical studies to prove the point a bit better. At the same time, these studies are certainly no placebo. And from these studies, you can derive a good decision on how to structure your health. If you're enjoying this video, by the way, I'd really appreciate if you can like the video and subscribe, and also ring the bell if you don't want to miss a video in the future. What about the downsides, you may ask? Well, there are certainly risks associated with caffeine. First of all, we would have your sleep. That's one of the most researched and one of the most known topics. Your entire architecture of sleep will be worsened, meaning that you don't just fall asleep at a later time, but also your very crucial phases for example, recovery and not so much dreaming actually, but mostly deep sleep recovery are handicapped by caffeine if it's absorbed close to bedtime. But more and more research is pointing out into the very long half-life that we discussed in the last video, having an effect on these slow wave sleep phases. 100 to 200 milligrams 0 to 6 hours before bedtime were having a significant effect on these states of sleep. So you would want to consider not drinking so close to bedtime. But a lot of research, as I said, is pointing out to the fact that even longer durations before the sleep have a negative effect. Anxiety and depression were tested in not too many studies, but one among adolescents found that around 140 milligrams of caffeine per day for the higher consumption group had an increase in anxiety and depression. If you're pregnant and consume caffeine, from which source isn't really important in this case, you're lowering the birth weight of your infant and also the size of certain parts like skull, feet, chest. So starting at doses as low as 50 milligrams or half a cup of coffee were enough to have this effect. It should be said that the infant is not automatically dying, but usually the larger the infant, the more healthy it is. Acute hypertension or hypertension in general is an interesting thing. You either have an effect right now, and for all people, your blood pressure will increase during the time that you are caffeinated, basically. At the same time, afterwards, it will return to normal. So if you are a healthy individual, studies have found that this will not have a correlation with other cardiovascular diseases in moderation. As we've seen in the above table, it even has a positive effect on cardiovascular diseases, probably because of the plant ingredients in coffee and tea. Other things in coffee have an increase of risk in cardiovascular disease. Definitely do not drink unfiltered coffee, for example, Turkish coffee. What the research points out in terms of blood pressure for irregular consumers, so ones that have caffeine in higher dosages every now and then, the blood pressure actually heightened for longer durations. And for that, 200 to 300 milligrams of caffeine from the source of coffee in a single dose were tested. Caffeine withdrawal symptom is a big and significant last factor you have to consider. Dosages starting from 100 milligrams a day were enough to cause symptoms when abruptly stopped. That included headaches, depressed mood, and overall fatigue. For that, all caffeine sources were incorporated. So if you're the anxious person at work under a lot of stress and caffeine increases that, I'd suggest you consider taking more moderate dosages of caffeine, especially if you don't want sleep deprivation. Your plasma levels being elevated at bedtime can cause your really deep and regenerative sleep to suffer, and for you to get into a vicious circle where you would need even more caffeine the next day to feel at a normal level. And then also talking again about the curve, the absorption of caffeine, really having high doses will lead to spikes, will lead to more jittery and anxious feelings for people that are not used to it. All these risks are not a caffeine problem, however, they are more of a absorption overall dosage problem you will find with high uses, drinking 5 to 10 cups of coffee per day because you're really addicted. Now to combine the good and the bad and actually answer the question if caffeine is all bad, we should take all facts into consideration to find out what kind of user you are and what kind of diseases you might have in your family, and also what factors caffeine really impact. Do not consume caffeine if you're under 18 or pregnant. I would even go as low as if you're under 21, if you're a late developer. There's a lot of health benefits. Some of them you can even get with decaffeinated coffee, especially in the gout region. And for these you will find 2 to 4 cups of coffee or 1 to 2 cups of tea usually be enough to reach long-term longevity benefits for your health. You see a pattern in which tea is usually more helpful for you. Especially green tea should theoretically have the most of the antioxidant, anti-inflammatory substances in it that help the body fight off these diseases, even fight off cancer, which I left out of this video because it's a huge topic on its own. And for an instant effect, if you're working, you can consume caffeine to find your mood to be increased and not have a depressive mood because you don't like your job or your winter depression kicks in. At the same time, you should consider staying under a threshold of 2 cups of coffee here. You can also, as I tried in the past, improve your cognitive focus with caffeine and get more of a memory effect, especially on your working memory. I should tell you that I really overdid it in my studies, especially when I did my master's in Sweden. I had almost a liter of coffee a day, and it sent me into a really nervous, jittery feeling at around 10 to 11 p.m. when I tried to go to, not bed, but at least come to rest. I had to take a long run of 10 to 15 kilometers to even settle and feel normal again. And it would have probably come to a mind of stressful anxiousness if I were in a fast-paced work environment. Especially in sports, reaction time and also sleep deprivation can be fought if you're not sleep deprived chronically at least. Take these limitations into consideration, however. Do not consume caffeine after 4 p.m. if you're going to bed at a reasonable time, that is. Some neuroscientists even suggest to not consume caffeine after 2 p.m. for the long plasma effect on the body. Caffeine, anxiety, and depression are somehow correlated, and this relationship is described in a U-shape. So lower doses of caffeine can improve the symptoms, but more caffeine is certainly not the merrier and will have a negative effect. So you should really stay under 2 cups of coffee here. And occasional users that jump off and on these very high doses of caffeine will have a sustained effect on blood pressure and should consider more moderate and more regular uses if they really need caffeine. Lastly, caffeine tolerance can really kick in for a lot of people that may not have realized that they are dependent on it to start their day. I certainly was in the past a lot of times. And what I've done is that I changed my habit of consuming. For example, it is really easy to abstain from caffeine, coffee, tea, whatever, while you're on holiday and don't need the extra energy because you actually want to settle and enjoy life for once. So to get off your caffeine tolerance and to let your receptors readopt, take a time off between 2 to 9 days. That is what evidence in the literature suggests. In the end, we can conclude caffeine is not the world's most used drug for no reason. If you don't treat it like water, know the dose, know the timing, and under which conditions to use it, you can really benefit from it long term and also in the short term right away actually. In the next video, we'll finally have a look at the nutraceuticals that affect how caffeine works. I will also suggest you to check out the blog I wrote on brain.e and to see the product I'm currently developing for all you caffeine sensitive and self-optimizing people. If you're interested in the core mechanisms that drive the effect of caffeine, I can also suggest my first video I've done on more of a theoretical foundation on caffeine and the molecule itself. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.